So I've tried to give you a sense of what's happened in the last 10 years. Now I'm going to really try and tell you what's happened the last two, because it's kind of hard to keep track with all of the crazy pace of innovation that's happening here. But what really has happened over the last 2 years, I think, has blown my mind. What happened before that, I think, was very impressive but predictable. But what's happened the last two, I think, has been even harder to predict. So I see there's a question in chat. So do you think algorithms can turn against humans if they acquire too much knowledge? So let me punt on this. And so I'm being somewhat provocative in the way that I describe the system. So they don't have presently, at least to our best knowledge, any free will, any consciousness, any notion of intention. And so there is not, at least at present, any scenario where it'd be reasonable to believe that an algorithm would not do what it's told to protect its own self-interest. So that's not on the table, probably not on the table for a long time. What could happen is that there could be unintended consequences of how a system gets used, because they are so complex and they are so hard to predict how they're going to respond in every single decision or every single instance. So the diabetic retinopathy one from Google is a good example, in that it was hard to anticipate that the algorithm was just going to fail in the real world due to lighting conditions. And so even though they are very impressive, they are still pretty brittle and not very robust to lots of different scenarios. And so I would say there's definitely high potential for unintended consequences, but I wouldn't worry about a robot uprising or anything like that anytime soon. All right. Any other questions before we talk about the crazy stuff? Okay. So I mentioned that there were three paradigms of machine learning. There's really sort of a 3.5 or 4, depending on how you count now. And the new one is what's called self-supervised learning. And it's still the scenario where we only have X's. So we only have images, or we only have the inputs. We still don't have labels. But we're going to try and fake the fact. We're going to try and pretend like we have labels by using some part of the data that we have as kind of a fake label. And we're going to have the model predict that. So I'm showing you an example of that here. So let's say I just have a bunch of pictures, but I actually don't have a label that says this is a picture of a dog. So what I'm going to make as a fake label is I'm going to crop out this part of the picture and have the algorithm fill in what goes in here, right? So I'm going to give the algorithm this picture, and it's going to have to produce this picture. And so the missing pixels are going to be like kind of fake labels in this scenario. And I'm just going to ask the algorithm to fill in the missing part of the pictures that I've hidden. And so self-supervised learning kind of has that quality where I have a bunch of data, I don't have labels, and I'm just going to mask or hide some part of the data that I have and have the algorithm or the model predict the parts that I've hidden. And so this has become known as self-supervised learning, and it has really taken over lots of different applications, and even sometimes works better than purely supervised learning. And so let's think about why maybe this would work. So the model kind of has to learn some abstract things to be able to do this, what is seemingly a very simple task. So it kind of has to know this part here is a leg. It kind of has to know that there's probably an ear that flops down here. It also kind of has to know that this spotted pattern probably continues through here. It has to know that there's probably some grass right here. And so it actually has to kind of have a world model, at least an implicit world model, to be able to do this seemingly simple fill in the blank exercise. These aren't random pixels that I've masked. There's actually structure in the part that doesn't see it. It kind of has to infer that structure from the data to be able to do this task. Another task that people have done on text data, so that infilling one is an example on image data. There's lots of text data on the internet, and so people have come up with self-supervised tasks for text data. And again, it's very simple. It's just a predict the next word kind of thing, like an autocomplete task. And so let's say I have a bunch of text data, but I don't have labels for that text data. All I'm going to do is pretend that the first couple words in the sentence are the inputs or the features, and that the word that comes next is the label. And I want the model to predict which word comes next. And so I'm showing you an example of this. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy blank, and the model has to fill in this. And so in this case, we would call this a language model because it's modeling language, but it's just going to be a deep neural network. And so I can get bunches of sentences from the internet, hide the last word or hide the third word, and have the model predict the word that I've hidden. And it just has to sort of fill in the blank and do this autocomplete thing. And so this is a very easy task to give to a model. It works anytime you have a lot of text data. And again, the sort of counterintuitive thing is like, what is this good for? So like maybe it's good for Gmail autocomplete or something like that, but that's not a task that I care about. Why should this be good for anything else? So there was a paper published that introduced a model called GPT-3 that sort of showed what all different things a model like this could do. And so importantly, they trained an enormous model, again, on the entire internet. So they downloaded a data set called the Common Crawl, which is all of the text data that's available on the internet, and processed it, and then just had GPT-3 do this fill in the blank task. And so that was the only thing GPT-3 was trained to do, was given a sequence of words, predict which word comes next. And so the mind-blowing thing is all the different things that actually are autocomplete tasks in disguise. So my lab uses GPT-3 for a bunch of different research projects. So I'm going to show you some example things that I asked GPT-3 to do that it was able to do. So the black text is the text that I gave GPT-3. And then the light text is what GPT-3 does by auto-completing. So GPT-3 will just predict the next word, and then the next word, and the next word, so on and so forth. So all of the light text is text that was generated by GPT-3 that I didn't give it. And so I asked GPT-3 to write a Python function that computes the average of a list of numbers. And so the tabs here are wrong, but this is a correct Python function that will compute the average of a list of numbers. And so GPT-3 was not trained as a Python programmer, but it can actually write correct Python code. I asked it, what is the prime factorization of 100? And so it correctly said 2 times 2 times 5 times 5, which is the correct prime factorization of 100. Again, GPT-3 is not a math bot. It's just predicting what most likely comes after the text that I gave it. I asked it to give me a Python array of 5 elements where every element's a prime number. Again, it has to know what a prime number is. It has to know 5 elements, but again, it correctly did this. This is dated now because the correct answer to this is Rafael Nadal. But I asked it which male tennis players won the most number of Grand Slams, and it correctly answered Roger Federer. Again, GPT-3 was not trained to do any of these things explicitly. It was only trained to predict which words come next. And so it was only trained to do this autocomplete task. But the thing that they showed in this paper is how many different things are actually kind of just autocomplete tasks in disguise. And so people use GPT-3 for a lot of different tasks that it wasn't originally trained for. There was a version of GPT-3 that was trained explicitly to program. And so it's called Copilot. And they did this autocomplete task on GitHub. So you feed it in the first part of a source file, and it just predicts which commands and which things come next. And you can actually get this as a plugin now for an IDE where GPT-3 will automatically complete your code for you. And so here is an example of this where I guess this looks like Python. No, this isn't Python because the curly braces. This is JavaScript maybe. But so they have put in the first part of this, and the highlighted part is the part that was auto-completed by GPT-3 or Copilot in this case. And so these types of models are making their way into lots of new applications as well. So I see a question in chat. Is that how the Google algorithm works? So Google's algorithm is what's called PageRank. And historically, it used to be a good old-fashioned computer science algorithm. It was something called an eigenvalue decomposition. But now they have largely replaced Google searching with a language model like this. So with a language model like GPT-3 that processes your query in a GPT-3-like model and then uses that to find relevant pages and relevant pieces of information. So yeah, Google search algorithm also works a lot like this as well. And I think we are almost to the end. I'm going to skip this example and talk about our final deep learning example. And so people have started to move beyond what are called single modal models. So GPT-3 is trained on text data. The computer vision algorithms are trained on imaging data. And people have started to train single models that can interpret both images and text. And so this was a model called DALL-E that was published, where you can put in a text prompt and it will generate, not find. So this isn't searching over the internet. This is generating new images that match your text prompt. And so if you ask it for an armchair in the shape of an avocado, you will get a bunch of, I think, like mid-century modern looking armchair avocados. And again, this is a neural network that was trained in not too a dissimilar way to how all the other neural networks that we've been talking about. It's just trained to make pretty pictures on the basis of a text prompt instead of diagnosing diabetic retinopathy. And so here's another example, the exact same cat on top as a sketch on the bottom. So first it has to render these cats, and then it has to render these cats as a sketch on the bottom. So very complicated images that it's generating. There's a new version of this called DALL-E 2. And again, this is the thing, these models just kind of really blow my mind. So when you can ask DALL-E 2 for things like this. So Sam Altman is an executive at a company called OpenAI, which is the company that made this system. And on Twitter, he was taking requests for DALL-E, and someone asked Sam to generate rabbits attending a college seminar on human anatomy. And so this is a image generated by DALL-E that I think is an amazing sort of, I think early 1900s, late 1800s, rabbits attending an anatomy seminar. Maybe they're diagnosed or dissecting a chicken here or something. But again, not only artistic, well-formed, but also matches the query. And so the photorealism of these things are the things that really blow my mind. So this is a still of Kermit, again, generated by DALL-E, only on the basis of this prompt, a still of Kermit the Frog and Blade Runner in 2049. If you've ever wondered what Kermit looks like as a Jedi Master, well, you can just ask DALL-E that. Here's Kermit in the Frog in Star Wars, in the ones that were made in the 70s. And you can modulate very subtle categories like this. So if you wanted this as a cartoon, or if you wanted this in the way that Stanley Kubrick would have shot it, or if you wanted as an abstract pointillism, DALL-E could take the same content and then render it in all of those different styles. And here's a still, if you've ever wondered what Kermit looks like as Wall-E, here's what that would look like. And so again, this is a deep neural network that's hallucinating these pictures on the basis of the prompts. I just want to reiterate that it's the same basic concept that was applied to Go, that was applied to protein folding, that was applied to medical computer vision. It's the same basic idea, but people are now solving all of these different problems with the same basic setup. So that's the end of the lecture today. Tomorrow, like I said, we're going to build a very simple one of these so that we can understand the nuts and bolts. But I hope to just at least whet your appetite a little bit with all of the different problems that people are using deep learning to solve. So I'm happy to stop there and answer any questions.
So is